Hello, everyone, and welcome to another London Ballet Circle in Conversation. Tonight, we welcome Joe Powell-Main. Joe has made quite a name for himself and brought a lot of attention not only to his wonderful choreography and his talent, but to using a wheelchair and crutches among dancers. Many of you will have seen him dance around the country. Not long ago, he wowed us all dancing in Kristen McNally's Dynamite piece for Northern Ballet. Joe's journey from a little boy who wanted to dance to today has thrown up challenges, twists and turns, but he has met them. And with Deborah Weiss tonight in the interviewer's chair, this promises to be a most interesting conversation. Joe's happy to take questions, so if you have any, please type them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd give your first name, that would be super. So now please welcome Joe Powell-Main and Deborah Weiss.
Hello, Joe. Welcome.
Hi.
It's so nice to be here with you, and it's a real privilege to be able to speak to you, actually. I'm going to launch straight in there and ask you about how you really got into dance, and how early you started, and what inspired you to go on to want to make it your career.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, hi everyone. It's great to be here and uh be at this event for London Ballet Circle. So my journey into dance, from what I've been told, and some of this comes from my parents, is that apparently as a small baby, even when sort of music came on television, whether that was an advert or something like that. And I think I always had like an interest in theatre. I can remember when I was quite a bit younger, I had a book that kind of showed how it worked in a theatre, and you kind of changed all the sets and things like that. So that was really, really quite interesting. And then I think from there, I kind of really became interested in theatre more and more. And I can remember watching productions of theatre and probably ballet with my sister on videotapes and things like that. And then I had the opportunity when I was very young, um, probably about maybe 4 or 5, to go and see English National Ballet Swan Lake. And I was kind of just enchanted by the whole thing. And kind of where I am in mid Wales, where I'm originally from, even though I don't have much of an accent. I kind of live in the middle of nowhere, and so you kind of have to go 10 miles one way to the town and 12 miles the other. So my mum looked for dance classes for me and my sister, and we started doing ballet first of all, and then the teacher said, "I can see some potential here for ballet, and do you think that is something that Joe would be interested in?" And it was, and she also told me that the kind of the community where I'm from is a strong farming community. And she said that she's had other talented boys who had shown talent for ballet, but their dads hadn't want them to be involved in ballet or dance. And so she actually said, would my dad be okay with me doing it? And he kind of said, whatever makes you happy. And so I think what inspired me to make dance my career, and I think it goes back to that sort of enchantment of the theatre, and it's everything that comes together of the choreography, the music, and the costumes. And I think it's just really interesting how you can tell a story through movement and you don't have to say anything. And I think that's what kind of really struck me and kind of made me think, this is something that I want to do.
Yeah, I mean, also you've just talked about the music and wanting to move to music. I mean, that is often the starting point, isn't it? And that feeling that you need to express yourself through the music, and obviously the body is then your instrument, etc. So after that initial thing where you became interested in it, you decided that you had an opportunity to go to the Royal Ballet School. I don't know how that came about. So tell us how it came about, because obviously if you're in mid Wales, it's not the easiest. So how did that happen?
Yeah, so I kind of decided I continued with my dance classes locally. So I was doing ballet probably about twice a week at the nearest towns. And then I was also doing tap and modern, and I had to go for that about an hour and a half away. And I think I really enjoyed doing all those different styles, but I think something about ballet kind of really spoke to me. And then we were looking at opportunities and kind of what might be possible. And I know many male dancers kind of say like the Billy Elliot story is obviously something that's very inspiring for them. And I probably suppose you could sort of say the same thing because I'd also seen the musical and also the film. And I think that kind of really did speak to me. And so we started looking at the Royal Ballet School, and I think my ballet teacher was kind of involved in that as well. And initially, we looked at the junior associate program, and sort of the nearest centre to where I'm from was about maybe 2.5 hours away in Birmingham. Um, and that was at the Birmingham Royal Ballet Studio. So I initially auditioned for that. I kind of didn't really want to go every week, so I went for the fortnightly option. But I was actually asked when I received my place on that program to come every week. And so obviously when they say that, you're not going to turn it down. And then I also did for about a year, and I would say that'd be my final year of the associate program. I also did the equivalent at Elmhurst School for Ballet as well. And my sister had also continued doing dance, and she went away to Tring School of Performing Arts. And so we, visited her quite a bit and saw some of her shows. And she used to tell us all these funny stories about her boarding and things like that, and the dancing and how much she was enjoying it. And so I think that's then when I kind of thought, maybe the traditional route that kind of everyone takes after primary school, or most people take, is kind of going on to a secondary school. But I remember, I think I went round one secondary school, and it just didn't feel like the place for me. And so then I started looking at different schools. And during my time on the junior associate program in Birmingham, I had the opportunity to perform with Birmingham Royal Ballet in Nutcracker and Sylvia. And it was during my performances in Sylvia that I was actually auditioning for White Lodge at the same time. And a story that I kind of remember from that time is that I had a final audition date through at the Royal Ballet School in White Lodge, and it was clashed with one of the performances with Birmingham Royal Ballet. And Birmingham Royal Ballet actually phoned up the Royal Ballet School and asked them if they could change the audition date, which unfortunately they couldn't. So in the end, they kind of slimmed down some of the performances that I was doing, and then kind of made them up a bit later on. And so I did my final audition at the Royal Ballet School. I remember I was kind of very awestruck with everything about the school. I remember seeing the Margot Fonteyn statue, and you have to touch that finger for luck. And I kind of felt, maybe this is somewhere that would really work for me. And I remember waiting and waiting and kind of waiting for the letter to come. And again, because I'm in with Wales, the post can be quite slow and sometimes can get lost. And so I was like, oh, has it kind of got lost? Has it got lost? And then I remember my mum picked me up from school, and she said, oh, you've got a letter here. And I opened it, and it said, we'd like to offer you a place at the Royal Ballet School White Lodge. And I remember at that time, I think I may have done something rather silly and run around the car park screaming with happiness. And so that's kind of the story of how I got into the Royal Ballet School White Lodge.
That's a really lovely story. And I just want to elaborate on the Margot Fonteyn statue. For anybody that doesn't know, although probably you all do know about the statue because it's so famous now, but the index finger on her, I can't remember if it's her right or her left hand, but it's very, very worn down. The sort of bronzing has come off. because you're supposed to, when you walk into White Lodge, you're supposed to touch the finger, and that's meant to bring you good luck for the term or whatever, or even the day, whatever, which is a lovely thing to do. And obviously, you were probably shaking hands with her every day, I would imagine. So you got into the Royal Ballet School, which is fantastic. Did you board there?
Yes, I did board. And I think that was probably one of the hesitancies for me as well, because I'd been, when there'd sort of been school trips and things like that, I hadn't actually gone on them with my sort of primary school. So I think the first time I boarded away was when I did the White Lodge summer school just before I joined the school. So yes, I was a boarder because it was about 5 hours each way from my house to White Lodge. And so that was definitely something that I was hesitant of. But I think because of my love for dance, I knew that maybe there wasn't any other way around it.
But also, you know that you're going to be at school with people that are like-minded, and so you're on the same pathway. And so hopefully, tell us about your friendships when you got there. I mean, did you suddenly think, oh, it's great, we can have midnight feasts and things like that? So I did in my day.
I'd probably say that I think there was a part of me that did think that as well, but people who've kind of known me throughout my my life so far, if you like, have kind of always said that I'm someone that doesn't like to be rebellious or maybe, you know, basically a goody two shoes. And so I probably wasn't kind of thinking in in that way. I think my sort of idea about when I joined the Royal Ballet School is that, as you said, I was going to be around like-minded people, because in my local ballet classes, and I mean even in the junior associate classes that I'd done, I think the first time that I was introduced to an all boys class was through the Elmhurst equivalent, and that I only did that for a year because even with the Royal Ballet School junior associates, there were only 3 boys, including me in the class. So I think I was kind of really interested to see how it would kind of work, because with the examination classes for RAD that I'd done locally, it was always a case of, because there were more girls versus me, the only boy, it would be like, oh well, you have to learn in a special version of the exercise, or you do something slightly different. So I think I was very, very interested in how that would work with an all boys class. And I think one of the things that excited me was, as you said, that sort of almost bonding with people who were like you and had the same goals and aspirations as you. Because, as I said, where I'm from, I didn't really know any other people who were interested in ballet or dance. And then also the kind of the opportunities that were there, that the potential of performing in the Royal Ballet's Nutcracker and the choreography competition and things like that. So I was absolutely nervous. I think before I went the first day, I was like, I got really nervous and kind of thought, oh, maybe I don't want to leave home and maybe it's not the right thing. Um, but then at the same time, I think I was like, this might be what I need to do to progress to the next stage of my training and hopefully my career as well. And yeah.
It's extraordinary that you say that when you think that you are only just 11 years old and making this huge decision about your future and a huge commitment in a way, and trying to think of it in such an adult way. Is this the right step? I mean, most kids don't have to think about what they want to do until after university practically. So it sounds like you were very mature about how you went about it. And also, you mentioned the opportunities. I mean, it's not just the opportunities to perform with the company, but presumably the opportunities to watch dress rehearsals and things like that. And I don't know, getting to know the company individually and finding your own uh, inspiration from certain dancers. Who do I like? Who do I want to go and see do this? And etc. etc. I mean, that's a big part of your development. So after after you get in, how does it go through the years? And tell me some high points that you had in that training. I'm sure there were a few. You mentioned the choreographic competition. I'm assuming you're going to say that's one of them.
Yes, the choreographic competition was definitely one of the high points for me. And I think the other high points were also you know, performing with the Royal Ballet and the Nutcracker. So in terms of kind of like my first year, um, it was kind of a bit disjointed actually, because, and that seems to be what I've noticed sometimes a common theme with me. It's almost when I get into something, even now, it may not be the smoothest of starts, but sometimes after you kind of get through those disjointed elements, it kind of improves. So I obviously really loved the ballet classes, and I thought that was wonderful. And I also, we used to have these classes, I think they were called like repertoire classes, and you'd kind of learn sections of movement or choreography from the, maybe like the Royal Ballet Heritage Repertoire. And I remember I kind of felt really sort of grown up of, oh, I'm learning, you know, like a La Female Garde dance or something. So it almost felt like you had that immediate connection to the company. But when I say about disjointed, so when I joined the school, I want to say we were only there a couple of months and then swine flu happened. So it meant that they sent a lot of people home, and I was unwell. I don't know whether it was flu, swine flu. I honestly don't know, but I also think I was probably feeling a little bit homesick as well, because that is something that I did struggle with quite a lot. And so, yeah, that kind of disrupted everything. And it was literally not too far before the Nutcracker with the company. And so, you know, I can remember that the kind of the tutors and the teachers were kind of quite stressed about how it was going to work. And so, yeah, we had an extra, I think we had an extra kind of like half term of maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And a lot of my year group, I think from what I heard, were kind of dropping like flies, as they called it. And I think they said that by the end of that period, there was only like 1 or 2 people left in the class. And so they kind of just made the decision, let's kind of shut the school, wait for this to pass, and then come back to it. And so obviously that was a bit of a challenge, but the sort of the high points within that. I remember you know, there was the party child in the Nutcracker, and that was obviously at that point done by students who were either in a year above or 2 years above me. And so initially I was like, oh, that's a shame. I'd really have liked to have done that role. And we were like the small soldiers who kind of came on in the battle. But then there was mention of that they would be choosing four kind of the smallest 8 boys in the year group to be the page to the Sugar Plum Fairy and her prince in the second act. And I kind of thought, oh, well, this is quite interesting, because you kind of get to interact and almost be in the same space as some of those principal dancers. And so again, I remember I kind of almost felt quite important, because we had ballet shoes and they were a grey color to kind of match what we were wearing. And I was like, oh, you know, I've got grey ballet shoes. It kind of felt like a little bit special, like I'd never had another color other than white. And we went to the opera house for a stage rehearsal. And they also made the decision. I don't know if they still do it now because kind of COVID and things like that, but at that time, 2 of the pages actually present the Sugar Plum Fairy and the prince with either the necklace or the badge that they give to Clara and Hans Peter in the second act. And the decision was made that I was going to be the one that kind of presented it to the Sugar Plum Fairy, that then she would give to Clara. So we went out to the opera house, and I remember I was feeling really, really excited. Who's going to be on the stage? Who's going to be on the stage? And that at that point it was Miyako Yoshida and Stephen McRae doing the roles, and I was like, oh my gosh, and this is great. And people have kind of said that throughout my kind of journey with dance, I'm quite good at remembering steps and kind of pick it up quite well. I don't really know about that, but I don't know, we'll see. And we went into the rehearsal, and I don't know what happened. I think I must have been completely starstruck. And the first time I kind of stepped on the stage with those principal dancers, I almost kind of went to pieces, and I was like, oh no, what have I done? I've, been with these amazing dancers. I've been chosen to do this, and I've just come in and I completely messed it up. And I know that my ballet teacher for that year, so it was Hope Keelan, and she was kind of like, oh, it happens. It's a big thing to come on the stage. And for anyone who kind of knows Hope Keelan, she is quite a hard taskmaster, and I think I was afraid kind of what she was going to say, but I think I was quite surprised that actually she wasn't as hard as I thought she was going to be. So that was good. And I think I made a promise to myself, like I'm not going to do that again. And so I almost became kind of hyper aware of everything. But that was definitely a high point. I mean, I remember, I had the opportunity to present the necklace to Miyako Yoshida, Roberta Marquez, and I remember Alina Kochikaru. And I think one of the things that was really special for me is that obviously the Sugar Plum Fairies were kind of like, oh, smiling as almost if to say thank you for presenting it to her. But I remember that when I presented it to Alina Kochikaru, she actually kind of said, oh, thank you very much, kind of in the middle of the show as I presented it to her. And that kind of felt really, really special. Other high points, I think, for me were the choreography competition. So my choreography teacher, I don't know if anyone from London Ballet Circle knows of or has heard of Dr. Susan Cooper. And sadly, she passed away at the end of last year. And I actually kind of spoke at her funeral, which was, it's quite apt that you ask these questions, because I'd been thinking about them recently. And yeah, I really wanted to do the choreography competition, but I think I was a bit nervous. And for some reason, I wanted to do the Tudor kind of piece. And so the first piece I ever did was called The Celebration, and it was based around Henry VIII. And he had a celebration, and he kind of got a little bit drunk at the end, and it kind of turned into a bit of a disaster. And I know that at that time, I really, really wanted to kind of have a mixed cast of boys and girls. But unfortunately, because of how it kind of worked itself out, you were only allowed to be in a certain number of choreographies. And so I ended up with an all male cast, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. And in the end, I kind of made it work. And something that Susie Cooper said to me, and kind of when we'd had conversations years later, she was like, oh, you really handled the responsibility of having like an all male cast in a really kind of mature way, and that always struck out to me. And so I think that was kind of a really special thing to sort of build that relationship with her, and that continued sort of beyond my time at White Lodge as well. And so that was definitely really special in the first year. The second year was kind of like another step up. For some reason, I found myself becoming more homesick in my second year. I don't really know why that was. And so that was definitely a struggle, but we changed teachers. So the next teacher I had was Antonio Castilla, who was gone on to English National Ballet and now San Francisco Ballet. And there were opportunities to kind of develop more of that virtuosic technique. And I'd actually been told that I had quite short Achilles, which was strange. I never thought that was the case. And so, they were kind of saying, you need to improve your jumps. I mean, I absolutely love jumping. Like, it was one of my favorite things to do, and it kind of that springiness and everything. But for some reason, I found that Pitti Allegro suited me sometimes a bit more than Grand Allegro. And so I kind of had to work a lot harder. And also, from what I was told, I was kind of what you call hypermobile. So it meant that it was good for dance, but it means that you have to work that much harder than everyone else to maintain everything. And so that was a little bit of a challenge as well. But again, some of the high points were that in that year I had the opportunity to work with Liam Scarlett. He did a piece, Dance Bohemian, that he'd done for the year previously, and then he kind of brought it back. And I think what was really nice is there were times in that second year I kind of felt sometimes I was being overlooked. and maybe that I didn't really fit in with what they wanted, and that was a bit of a struggle for me to contend with. But for some reason, I almost kind of felt a bit more buoyed on to go for it, because within that piece that he created, he kind of selected me and another boy and kind of put us at the front quite a lot. I mean, it was not piece, but it was almost like there was a little bit of really helped me. And also we didn't do the Nutcracker, we did Peter and the Wolf by Matthew Hart, which for again anyone who's seen it is all Royal Ballet School students apart from the Wolf. And so I had the chance to work with Sergei Polunin. So an interesting story about that is I wasn't originally cast as a huntsman. Came from feeling that maybe I wasn't, fitting in with what they were looking for. I was actually cast as a wall, so I had to kind of wear like a painted face with a big brick on my head and kind of carry a brick as well, and kind of do this weird dance where you kind of stuck your bottom out a bit. Again, which was really fun. Like, not that I was complaining, but I was second cast huntsman, and when it came to the last so in rehearsals, a couple of people had kind of had injuries and picked up injuries and things like that. So I ended up in those rehearsals dropping into other people's roles as well as doing the wall and things like that. And then the final two shows came at the Opera House, and the first cast person that I was understudying had an asthma attack in the middle of the show, and then went into the dressing room and had another one, and so they had to call an ambulance and all this really stressful thing. And then in the end they made a decision. They were like, "Oh, Joe, can you go on and do this role?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll do it," with very, very little rehearsal time. And what was kind of interesting is the role that I was portraying was in The Huntsman was supposed to be the smallest person, but I was like this much taller than the second person, so it kind of looked a bit strange. But I can remember that the role that I did as the huntsman, you had to were the person that pulled Sergei Polunin off with a rope, and I'd never done that before, and so they held the curtain going up for about 20 minutes so I could practice with Sergei Polunin. So that was kind of interesting. So I did it with no rehearsal, and kind of went for it. And then also later on in that year, I was selected by Antonio Castillo to be in a piece that he was creating, which was all male dancers, kind of some of the older year groups, younger year groups, and he selected two boys to kind of be the first cast, and then I was the understudy. And so that was an experience in itself, kind of learning what you can from the back, and that is quite challenging as a young dancer. And then again, the dancer who I was understudying, just the day before the premiere, I think did something to their heel or sprained their ankle or something like that. And I had to go on in the dress rehearsal with no rehearsal and just do it. And there were lots of big lifts, so I hadn't really been lifted before. So I was like, I felt like I was being lifted right up into the ceiling and things like that. And so, yeah, I went on and did a dress rehearsal with no rehearsal. And in the end, I ended up doing a show as well. So that was a really, really interesting experience. And then sort of in my third and fourth years, I'd also continued with choreography, but unfortunately I'd never kind of got through to the final, which meant that my work after that first year wasn't really seen by an audience. So I kind of felt really disheartened by that. And Susie Cooper kind of continued, she's like, "I really think you can do this as a choreographer, so kind of don't give up." And so I did continue, but I wasn't successful. Sort of in my third year, I changed to a different teacher. There were challenges because I grew a lot, and I have people kind of have told me I've got a very flexible back. So then again, I had to work harder for everything. And again, the homesickness was still there. And I think, the growing and everything and the changing of my body is kind of where some of those challenges sort of began. But I will say one thing that happened in my third year that I was very grateful for is I got the opportunity to perform a dance and drama piece for Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra in the Diamond Jubilee year. So as much as there was those challenges, I was still grateful for that. Absolutely.
So, and then, so after that, when you're saying first, second, and third year, is that upper school or is it still White Lodge?
So it's still White Lodge. So I
Yes.
think, yeah.
My goodness. So, my goodness, you've packed so much into those 3 years. So what happens later on, and did you transition to the upper school?
No, so unfortunately, I didn't go to the upper school. So I'd done that sort of third year, and then I went into the fourth year. So that I think they call it year. Is it year 10 now? Yeah. So I think it's year 10. And I went back to having the teacher that I'd had in my second year. And I thought things were going really well. Like he was saying, oh, you've improved so much, your jump has got a lot higher, you've got a lot stronger, things had gone really well. But again, I'd grown a significant amount in a short space of time. And again, it was that thing of balancing the hypermobility and the strength. And what happened was I'd done I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks of my first year. And then I did a jump and I landed it, and something didn't feel quite right. It almost felt like my right knee had popped slightly. And I was like, oh, this doesn't feel quite right. And so I was given the diagnosis by the school physio of patella tendonitis. And I was told to kind of rest over the half term, and we come back and kind of reevaluate it. And so I started kind of coming back after half term and started to be reintroduced to stuff. And there was an opportunity to perform at Buckingham Palace for Prince Charles as he was then. And obviously with the injury and all other issues, it meant that I was no longer able to do that. So that was really quite disappointing because it had been a piece that we'd done in the third year that I'd been in. So it was almost like I'd, if you like, created the role in it, and then it meant someone else was now coming in to take it over, and that can be really challenging. And so I wasn't in that. And then I noticed that because I'd put so much sort of pressure on my left leg to kind of compensate, and I have sway backs as well with the kind of like the hyperextended knee. I think I got up out of an academic class, and I seem to remember it was a French class. And as I got up out of the chair, I kind of felt my knee completely give way. And again, I was like, this doesn't feel right. And there was kind of like a pain sort of in the lower part of my kneecap. And that was really, really challenging. And I kind of, was in a lot of pain, and I was struggling to walk. So my right knee had gotten better, and I couldn't bend my leg, and I didn't really understand. And it was really frustrating as well because I was away from home. So there was the added stress of that on it. And, sometimes it can be, trying to tell people what's going on and the difficulties you're having at a young age. That is really quite a big task to put on someone's shoulders. And sometimes I felt like I wasn't heard properly. And that was really, really, really difficult to kind of undertake. And, there were times where I was, taken off dance, and then they tried to reintroduce me into dance, and it just didn't work. And sometimes I felt like maybe I wasn't being listened to as well. And that was also really, really challenging. And then I went home for a little bit, and I went to see an orthopedic surgeon, and he diagnosed me as having a fat pad impingement, which is it meant that the soft tissue behind my kneecap and sort of my tibia, fibula, and thigh bone, because of my growth, had kind of got stuck behind there. And he said, like, it's not a serious injury, but because the knee has so many complex nerve endings and pathways, it means that it's pinching on a nerve as well. So that was what was causing the pain. And I kind of got a bit better of an understanding. And he kind of said that the reason I was struggling to bend my leg is because there's kind of like a reflexology in there, that when there's pain with the knee, the quad muscle shuts down and kind of protects it and thinks, no more kind of thing. And he said that that's kind of what had happened to me. So his sort of plan of action was, you know, let's let the school know what's going on. Let's schedule in kind of quite a simple knee operation, which would mean like keyhole surgery going into my left knee and kind of trimming this fat pad out the way. Let's maybe try and see that if we can avoid that with some sort of rehab, but let's schedule it in anyway. And let's go from there and see what happens. And unfortunately, things didn't pan out as I hoped, and that was really quite stressful. And I ended up at the age of 14 having knee surgery to kind of remove that soft tissue. But what was interesting is that he said that when I was under general anesthetic, he tried to bend my leg and it just wouldn't go. So it was just interesting because I think sometimes people had thought that maybe I was intentionally obstructing the movement of my leg. That just wasn't the case at all. Like it's a kind of a poorly understood, and I want to say maybe under researched as well, reaction to pain. Um, and so that was definitely challenging. And then sort of after this knee operation, I was having further problems. Like I still for some reason excuse me, couldn't bend my leg for 6 months afterwards, and there was kind of no explanation as to why that might be. And you know, I went in for inpatient physio to try and sort that out, and there were all kind of other issues that were coming up with my leg, my left leg. I started having problems with my ankle. It was just really unstable, and so I was using crutches to kind of get around. And so unfortunately they were like, we're not really sure how to proceed, so they kind of almost discharged me at that point. You know, I sought some alternative treatment and things like that, and with the support of my mum and my dad and my sister and my granddad as well, the entire family, things started to get a little bit better. So sort of maybe 7 or 8 months after surgery, I was able to start kind of bending my leg. And at one stage, I started walking a little bit with one crutch as well. And I thought, you know, I'm going to be back to dance. Because the other thing that had happened within this time is because it had taken so long, the Royal Ballet School kind of decided that they would not, that it was best that I didn't come back, and kind of seek alternative ways of training or something like that. And so that was quite difficult to handle as well. And then these improvements started to happen. I was like, oh, I'm going to be walking on one crutch soon, maybe no crutches. Maybe I'll come back to dance. And then in May 2014, just over a year after my surgery, me, my mum, and my dad were in a car and we were driving into our local town. And my mum kind of said, oh, look at that motorbike. He's really putting his foot down and he's really, I don't think he's looking where he's going. I'm going to pull over and kind of just in case. And what happened was he overtook cars, obviously didn't look where he was going, came on the wrong side of the road and crashed into the front of our car. And it could have been so much worse had my mum not pulled over onto that grass verge because she looked ahead and seen something was going to happen. And unfortunately, he then kind of shot up the road, went under a car behind us, and he was killed. And so at the age of 15, 16, because I'm quite sort of young in my year group, you know, that was another thing to contend with, and that kind of compounded everything. And for months after the accident, like I couldn't even speak. Every time I spoke, it was coming out in a stutter. And I even, you know, found it difficult to step outside the house and come into the garden because it was just so, I think it was just the element of, you know, that kind of almost abrupt and traumatic ending to my time at the Royal Ballet School, mixed with the car accident. You know, that was so difficult. And then obviously it made my disability just that 10 times worse as well. And I was kind of left with very, very, very limited use of my left leg. And my foot kind of left foot turns at an angle, and that's kind of still the case now to this day. I mean, I've had ebbs and flows with it, but that's as a consequence of all those things, that meant that I ended up becoming more reliant on my wheelchair and only using crutches for extremely short distances. And so I more or less became like a full-time wheelchair user. And at that point, I thought, dance is done. I don't want to have anything to do with it because it's so traumatic. I was still friends on like Facebook with a lot of my year group, and it was really difficult kind of seeing them continue on with their training at White Lodge. And it was almost like that's what I should have been doing. And so in the end, I actually made the decision to create another Facebook account to get away from that and do it under my middle name so people wouldn't know who I was. And yeah, I didn't know kind of what I was going to do. And dance, I just thought that's it. And I don't really want to have anything to do with it again either.
So there must have been a point where, because you are 15 or 16, whatever, that you make a decision about your education, your normal education, and presumably your parents were very supportive. I mean, I have to say that the story that you've just told is so horrific, and here you are today, and we will get on to all those good things now. It's really inspirational to hear you talk and to think how it's made you into what you are today. But I would imagine the aftermath, apart from the initial sort of shock, horror, how am I ever going to get over this? But then somewhere within you, because you're obviously a very strong character, you made the decision, right, I'm going to do whatever it is, normal education that you need to do. And then you must have come to a point where you reassessed how you were feeling about dance and missing dance. So let's move on to that and tell me where you were at once you went back to school, basically.
Yeah, so it's really interesting you kind of posing this question. So I I missed a lot of school because of it, and I didn't end up going back into sort of what you'd call like a mainstream secondary school. So I ended up. It was again. It was. I almost found it really difficult to just be around anyone that was other than my family because it just didn't feel safe. And that took me a while to get over. And I think as well, and we'll probably get onto this in a little bit, that the reason that dance was so traumatic for me and I didn't want to have anything to do with it, and I've only think realized this like in the last sort of recent few years, is that I really missed it. And I think I didn't really want to admit that to myself. And so that's I think what made it harder. So when I went back into sort of sort of that normal education, if you call it, I first started and that was just before the car accident when things had kind of improved a little bit. I was going to an education centre that was about 30 miles away from where I live. And I was going sort of every Monday and every Friday. So it was kind of like a nice introduction because it wasn't full time, but there was work that I could do at home and things like that. So it was nice that it was kind of that hybrid of I was meeting other people again. And one of the things that, I enjoyed, I mean, obviously it was a challenge with access and things like that, but they did like a cookery class on a Friday, and I know that my parents really liked it. I mean, I had a lot of help from the teacher as well, just to kind of help with everything. But they really liked that I was bringing cake home on a Friday, so that was good. But then when the car accident happened, because I just couldn't travel in the car, that stopped, and that was like another setback. And we'd started to look at could I do GCSEs, and there was also something called an arts award where I could write about, my experiences in the arts and put together like a portfolio, and it kind of got that thinking more creative because I was thinking, well, I can't do dance. Could I? And because again, you had to do a certain number of contact time because of the car accident, it meant that I missed out on the award. So it meant that I only kind of scored what they said was the level one when I knew I could have done a level two and done it well. Another setback, you can't stand up at a time. And that was really challenging to kind of explore what I could do. And then after that, it was just looking about other things. I then involved myself in kind of homeschooling. So I was doing GCSEs that my mum was helping me with, and then I'd send the work off to a tutor at a local college. And there were some setbacks in that. So I'd gone from being at the Royal Ballet School, being able to have almost 8 or 9 GCSEs plus an A-level dance. That because of all these issues, it meant that I only ended up with 2 GCSEs. And because I was unwell as well, I missed one of what could have been a third one. I couldn't do the paper because I was very well myself at that time. So I ended up with English, and I was like, what? Said, could you do a performing arts course? And I thought, maybe not. I don't know whether I want to do this. My mum kind of said, you should go for this. My sister Holly had continued with dance training, and she went to the Royal Academy of Dance to be a dance teacher. And she performed at Move It. And while she was there, my mum saw a stand for Wheelchair Dance Association classes for dancers doing Latin ballroom using wheelchairs. And she thought, this is something that Joe could do, and maybe it would kind of edge me towards doing a performing arts course at college. But unfortunately, again, the nearest place to do that was Manchester. So that was kind of like a granddad is from Buxton. We visited him a lot anyway at that time, so it wasn't too far. And so that kind of got me into it, and I went into doing performing arts at college. I did these Latin and ballroom classes, and I competed, and I won some medals, which was really nice. And this almost kind of flipped everything on its head, and it almost opened my eyes to me that maybe I wasn't going to dance in the way that maybe I thought I was, but that doesn't mean that I can't do it. And because the environment, with the other wheelchair using dancers who came internationally were really, really. So I looked at, because for some reason, because of my GCSEs, the original art course do what would be the equivalent of an A-level arts course. You can only do a GCSE course. And I was like, but I know I could give so more, and I'd have so much to give. So in the end, I switched colleges halfway through, and I went to Clarendon Sixth Form College in Ashton under Line in Manchester. And so we were living with my granddad for a while. I feel like you're wasted on the musical theatre course. Why don't you transfer over to dance for the second year? And I thought, oh, well, I do want to do acting as well. I want to try it and see what happens. And then I made the decision to transfer over to dance. And I think it's probably one of the best decisions I ever made, because then that led to me studying a dance degree at the Arden School of Theatre in Manchester. And I was kind of exposed again to my love for ballet. We did ballet, there was street dance, tap, aerial, urban, commercial, just everything. And all these different dance styles. And it was kind of really interesting to me to almost go on that investigative journey of how do I translate this as a wheelchair and crutch using dancer. And then I put things online as well to try and see if anyone out there was like me and get some reaction. And I connected with Mark Brew, and he said, "Ooh, there's a company that I do some work with in South Wales in Ballet Cymru. I think they might be interested in you. Let me put you in touch." And I went to a summer school, and they gave me a scholarship for the summer school, and then things kind of went another direction from there.
That's really actually very exciting to hear because I know Darius James very well. We used to dance together, and he is the sort of person that really does give people opportunities. And I don't know if your connection is okay, Joe. I'm just checking this because sometimes you're cutting out a bit. Um,
Yeah,
right.
I think it's all right at the moment if everyone can hear me okay.
Okay, it's been a little bit stuttery, but you seem to be fine now. Yeah, so working with Ballet Cymru, it must have changed your whole perception of what lay ahead with your future. And a door has opened. This is something you can do. This is something where somebody really wants you to contribute um, in a dance way. And I wanted to ask you about Mark Brew as well, because obviously he's a very, very interesting man, and he's made a whole career out of being a wheelchair dancer. And he's very inspirational as well. So what was it like connecting with him?
So with Mark Brew,
Mm.
I've never actually met him in person, but I've always kind of connected with him social media, and he has always been someone I would say that is really quite supportive. Um, so yeah, he was I think as well at one stage, because when he was working with Axis Dance, he was trying to see if I could potentially come over and do something with them in America. But unfortunately, that kind of didn't work out because it was kind of when my dance degree was going on. Um, but he you know he tried that way, and then he kind of said Ballet Cymru, um, and yeah, he's someone again he's very individual. He kind of I felt like he took the time to get to know me quite well, even though, as I said, we don't know each other quite well. And even now, with some of the things that like I'm doing and things with everything going on, um, he will still occasionally like repost and share stuff that I'm doing. And so I'm actually really kind of grateful for that. And a few years back, we did talk about he'd done like an outdoor piece, and he was looking at remounting it. And he kind of said, "Oh, I don't want to at this stage dance in it like I had done previously." And he kind of said, "Oh, your name kind of came up as someone who might be a suitable replacement for me in the piece." Um, Again, as things happen with projects, sometimes they happen, sometimes they don't, and unfortunately that didn't happen. But yeah, he's a great person, and I think what's interesting with him, he excuse me, he had that ballet background before he had his accident, and then he's kind of come back to it in more sort of like a, I want to say like a more contemporary-ish way. um but I think he was really he recognized the fact that although I did contemporary movement as well, my sort of the core movement, that everything that I do is ballet. Because I can remember my one of my tutors on the degree course, um, she kind of said like, everything you do is great, but I can always see, even with other styles, it's like I can see that ballet in it, and I can see that line through it. And obviously, when you're doing street dance, which is always kind of like popping, locking, things like that, you kind of have to really go against that. So that was a challenge, but it was something that I enjoyed. And then sort of to answer your question with Ballet Cymru, I yeah, it did open up a new way of thinking, a new way of possibilities, and it made me think, actually, maybe I can be a ballet dancer just in an entirely different way. And how do I make that happen? Um, and so yeah, that was interesting, because I initially joined Ballet Cymru as an apprentice through the pre-professional program, and so I was doing that alongside um, my last year of my degree, because the Arden in Manchester were really great, and they kind of said, "Listen, you can do your final year of your degree study distance learning, because we recognise that this is a really, really good opportunity for you. And so why don't you do that, continue with the degree, and then, you know, see what happens. And obviously I did that. I got offered a place as a contracted dancer in Ballet Cymru just as the first lockdown happened. And so everything kind of, again, was thrown out of kilter, as it was for all of us. And so it was just then navigating, kind of coming back into something after the dust had kind of settled, and see what happened, really.
So I want to really talk to you about possibly the last year and a half or so, because you've done so much. You've worked with Northern Ballet and Kristen McNally. You had the Sadler's Wells performance, which I've completely forgotten the name of. What was it called?
Empower in Motion.
That's right, that's right. And that was really my first proper encounter with you as a dancer. You've also done something in Portugal called Festival dos Canais. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not fluent in Portuguese. But that looked really exciting. I saw a clip of you, and it was outside, and people were sort of clapping madly, and that was the piece that you did, that was your own choreography.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about those things, and also you've been to Greenwich, I think, just
Yes.
recently. So talk a little bit about those different projects and how they've come about and what they mean to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of what kick-started everything for me and kind of exploring what the possibilities were was I was working with Ballet Cymru, and things had opened up in 2021, and there'd been some challenges, and I kind of was feeling like I was overlooked a little bit, and I had a lot more to give, and I felt like I was becoming boxed in slightly. And at one point, it did make me question whether I actually had a place in the dance industry at all. And what happened was someone reached out to me from the Paralympic homecoming ceremony, for well, I would say the 2021 edition, but it was 2020 because of, that was the title, because it was obviously a year later. And they said that they'd seen me online, they'd heard about my story. Would you like to perform at the Paralympic homecoming ceremony in Wembley? And of course I was like, yes, because the Paralympic athletes, I don't think that people would have been as receptive to me as a disabled dancer and just a disabled person in life without the Paralympic movement, because that's made so many more people think, is this a possibility? And within that, the decision was made that they would reach out to some different ballet companies. And given my history and my story, they decided that let's reach out to the Royal Ballet and see what happens. And they came back to me, and I remember I had a phone call from the producer, and he said, I've got some very exciting news to tell you. We've just had a meeting with Kevin O'Hare at the Royal Ballet, and he said he would be very interested in making this collaboration happen. And that was my first initial connection with Kristen McNally. And what was really nice as well is that we kind of co-created the piece together. So it started with a solo, worked for me, and then incorporated the other dancers. I think we created it in maybe, I want to say, 3 days before the performance. And it was with Birdie as well, a live musician, and she's, you know, a fantastic singer and everything. And I was like, oh my gosh, Birdie. And yeah, that was just amazing. And that sort of really opened my eyes up as well by having that choreographic input into it. Because I feel like I've almost been choreographing my own way of moving, because I'm usually always the only disabled dancer in a group or a class or a company. And so that opened up my eyes. And with those challenges that I'd been experiencing when I'd been in Wales, I then kind of made the decision, because the reaction had been so lovely and I hadn't really expected it, why not try and see if I can pursue things as a freelance artist? And I was very fortunate to maintain a connection with the Royal Ballet. So again, another project came about with Kristen McNally, and also one of the dancers from the company that I'd worked with, Isabel Luback, who has now recently been promoted to a soloist, which is wonderful for her as well. Probably means that she won't work with me again because she'll be too busy. But yeah, wonderful for her. We did a piece. It was called The Sleepwalker. So it was a modern adaptation of La Sonnambula, which is an opera and has been a ballet, with Mikhail Baryshnikov in, and Alexander Campbell was kind of spearheading it. Christian directed it. We performed it at the Royal Ballet Spring Draft Works in 2022. But going back to that thing of things never always going smooth, I'd rehearsed with Isabel all the way through, and then kind of the stage rehearsal before the spring draft works, I get a message to say Isabel has got COVID, so it means that she won't be performing the role, so we're going to have to try and find you a replacement. And so they were looking at different dancers, and in the end they kind of decided that Kristen would step in and do it. And Kristen, she was kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing, I've choreographed it, but I don't know what I'm doing. So we were rehearsing, and there was a lot of like complex hand movements and things like that. And so that was great. Then from there, we were invited to take the piece to Greenwich and Docklands International Festival for the 2022 edition. And so they wanted to extend it further. And Isabel was like, oh, finally, I'm actually going to get to be in it now and do it properly. We were in the opera house rehearsing, ready to take it to the festival. And unfortunately, the sad news came that the Queen had died. So it meant that the performances in 2022 were curtailed and cancelled. But the festival did say, we will come back to this, we will make it happen. And something that was quite nice is during that time, Alexander had brought in like a filmmaker. And one of the people who was interviewing me was someone, Sean Flanagan, who's now the general manager, I think, of London City Ballet. And he was in my year group at White Lodge. So I had not seen him for 10 years, probably a lot more than that. So he was interviewing me, and they put a film together and they showed it on World Ballet Day. So it kind of got people interested in the possibility. And so a year later, we finally had the opportunity to perform it at Greenwich and Docklands International Festival properly. And that was really great. And Kevin O'Hare came as well, which was really nice. I mean, I have this horrible tendency when I work with a company and I really like them, especially as a freelancer, you kind of have to advocate for yourself a lot. And also having a disability on top of that, it means that you kind of have to fight, I feel, probably even harder. I always send emails, like we do a project and I'm like, I really enjoyed working with you. What can we do next? And so Kevin O'Hare was like, oh, let's keep it going. What more could we do? And then that's kind of spiraled into things I've done and showcased my choreography as part of the Learning and Participation Program, which formed the Festival of New Choreography back in 2024. I also took some work, so it was a balcony pas de deux for the 60th year of Romeo and Juliet, because the company was celebrating it for the 60th anniversary, and took that as well. And then I also choreographed the Next Generation Festival. Empower in Motion came about, and I got to choreograph something for that at Sadler's Wells and take Passionately Defiant there. Then I kind of kept in touch with Greenwich and Docklands International Festival, and Bradley Hemmings, the director, has been really, really supportive of me. And so he's really supported me. And so he was like, oh, we've got this sister festival in Portugal. You've not been international before, so let's take Passionately Defiant there and take it to an outside setting. And it's also coming back to London on the 6th of September. And so he's really, really championed me. And then I'd also been speaking with Northern Ballet, and that came about. What choreographer can we get in? Kristen came in. That became what it was. And so as a freelancer, I felt that a lot of the time I've kind of been in the driving seat as much as I can, because I want to work as much as I can, and I want to show people that it's possible. And sometimes, I hate to say this, but as a freelancer, you can feel a little bit kind of disposable. When you work with the company, it's like, we do a project, it comes to an end. What do I do now? I email someone and maybe they don't come back to me. So now I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And this is kind of where my idea of creating my own sort of banner for choreographic and creative work, JPM Productions, came about.
Golly. Well, I wanted to ask you about accessibility in terms of, I mean, I think you wanted to talk about this a little bit. What happens what are the challenges of accessing dance and ballet as a disabled person? And also you wanted to talk about how you could improve this because of your own experience. And obviously, you know, it's early days yet, I think, but your own success has kind of put it on the map, hasn't it? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, and thank you for saying that, because sometimes, yeah, I do feel very fortunate to have the opportunities that I have had, but sometimes it can be a lot. I feel like I'm trying as much as I can to advocate for more accessibility in dance, and sometimes, you know, there can be some really great points and you feel that this is amazing, but then there's other times that it becomes a lot of a challenge and it's like a lot of weight on my shoulders. And I accept that weight and I accept that responsibility, because I think it's important that I use my platform to promote it for other people as well. But sometimes when there are significant access challenges, it can sometimes feel like you're fighting like everything. And I think specifically with classical ballet, I think contemporary dance is that far ahead a little bit more with different bodies and different ways of looking at things, because in contemporary dance you don't have to always have like that perfect aesthetic that looks a certain way, that looks pretty. And in ballet, people sometimes think if you can't use certain parts of your body, you can't make that aesthetic. And is there a relationship between that and this idea of perfection? I don't know. Is it because I'm in a wheelchair that maybe I don't have that idea of perfection? And to be honest, with the experiences that I've had, the majority of people are always really open and supportive, but there are a very small minority who aren't, and that can be really difficult. And so some of the challenges are, I'm very fortunate that I had that Royal Ballet School training, but how can we have other dancers who maybe acquire their disability earlier in life have that same level of training, or be able to even have that opportunity to take part in a ballet exam? Because looking at the syllabus, I feel like there's, for a lot of different examples, there's that want and there's that need to change and make it more inclusive. But again, it's at that very early stage, and we want to get to a stage where more dancers in wheelchairs, you know, different accessible needs, can take an exam, and if they wish to, take that further and join, you know, a ballet school or a company and achieve that high level of dance. And I feel like there's some amazing things for community level and grassroots dance, and there's some amazing things for professional dance, but it's not quite meeting in the middle yet. And that's something that's really important. And then another thing, with especially with recent news, especially here in the UK with welfare and things like that, some of the personal challenges I've had is with access to work. Um, I need a support worker to help me get places. I don't drive, so I need help with that. I need help getting places. And sometimes I've had a couple of instances where companies won't employ me because of the level of access needs that I need. It's too much. We don't have the budget. We don't have the time, and all this. And this is where access to work came in and helped me. And they helped. I had to get a support worker who my mum has had to fulfill that role, because where I live and the irregular hours, it was so difficult to get someone, and she does it beautifully. But in the past sort of year, there's been some cuts to that system, which has negatively impacted me and my ability to do a job. And so I've had to kind of cut back a little bit what I can do as well. So that's been an extra challenge. Yeah, so there's lots of different things I think that need to be addressed with making things more accessible. Like I said, it's having that support for a disabled person to feel like they can achieve in whatever way that looks like, and also bringing together the grassroots and the professional level, because there needs to be a pathway. there needs to be a pathway, I think.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I was going to ask you something actually. When you were talking about your classical training, it's very ingrained in you, and you look like a classical dancer. And one of the reasons is your port de bras. So I feel if you're pirouetting in your chair, and I mean your spotting is exactly the same as it would be if you weren't in your wheelchair, and your arm movements seem to the take the wheelchair around, if you know what I mean. And it feels like a Cicchetti lesson with your arms. It's incredible. So is that something, do you think that's just you, or is it something you've worked on because you're very conscious of your posture when you're sitting there, and and it helps you to feel that sort of pull up in a sense?
Yeah, so I actually think it's something, thank you so much for saying that about my photograph, first of all, because actually before I acquired my disability, I was always told that that was one of my weaker areas. So I felt like I've had to work quite hard on that, because obviously the wheelchair now becomes my legs. And it's just really about incorporating everything. So I've worked really hard on that. My sister is a ballet teacher, so she teaches she's taught for a number of different places, but she currently teaches at Cheltenham Ladies College, teaching ballet, and she's an RAD teacher. And she's definitely someone that I call on a lot for advice with my arms. And I think with her input, she gave me, because I can kind of call her whenever I want. She gave me that really kind of specific thing, and it almost unlocked something in me to go, aha, I can do this with my arms. But I also would say that the Royal Ballet School system of training, as I said, there were so many high points, there were challenges, but one thing I have taken away from it is there is always that element of, because the Royal Ballet and the Royal Ballet School are rooted in that Ashton style, the very British ballet of, a pulma, how the hand relates to the arm, the eyes, that thing. I think that was something that kind of became ingrained from that training. And I think that's as well why I was so happy that the Royal Ballet have been open to a dancer like me to work with them on different projects, because I think I was kind of the opinion that maybe, because it's so rooted in tradition, they wouldn't be open to someone like me. But it's the complete opposite to what I expected. So hopefully that kind of answers your question a little bit.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go on to some other questions now that are pouring in here. So the first one is from Judy, who says, I only want to say that I admire you and your attitude on life. I wish you every success. That's from Judy. And then Jane Lambert says, good evening, Joe and Deborah. I became a fan when you were at Ballet Cymru. You appeared in several roles when you were at the company. I also attended and watched you in company class at Rogerstone. Is
Yeah,
that right?
Roger Stone. Yeah,
Oh, how do you say it?
it's Roger Stone.
Oh, Rogerstone, right. What were the high points of your time with that company?
So I would definitely say that without it, I wouldn't be where I am now. It opened up possibilities of what I could do as a ballet dancer. Um, it There were challenges, and those challenges have made me a stronger person. And because of that, I now have more of a, I feel like I'm a much stronger person because of it, because there'll be times, as I said, where I'll email someone and, they seem really interested in working with me. And then maybe they'll turn around and be like, actually, we've decided to go in a different direction. And that can be difficult to take. But because of that, and because of my experience at Ballet Cymru, the one thing that I've definitely taken away is I think I've become more confident in my abilities and who I am as an artist and who I am as a person. And I feel like that if there are any moments of adversity, I've kind of been like, do you know what? if it's not going to happen this way, I'm going to make it happen a different way. And again, that is something as to why now JPM Productions has become a thing. And so, yeah, it's made me a stronger, more resilient person, and brought me into the world of ballet. So, yeah, I am grateful for that.
Fantastic. So here's one from Jess. Hi, Joe. As another hypermobile person, I'm curious about any additional challenges there might be to staying as strong and stable as possible while being a wheelchair and crutch user.
Yeah, there are definitely challenges. Yeah, so thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I have to be, so I now, I have to kind of work a bit more hand in hand with my disability. And because of that, it kind of ebbs and flows. So there have been times where I've been able to do quite a bit on crutches and it works really well. And there are other times where I haven't been able to. So, say, for example, if I was to do like a tour, I don't know how my body is going to take if I did a lot of that tour on crutches. So I've kind of had to make the conscious decision that let's focus more on the wheelchair because that is always going to be a constant. And I've also had to be really careful as well because there have been times, and at the moment, I'm in one of those times where my disability has kind of now affected a little my right leg a bit as well. So it means that crutches is not possible at the moment. And so I have to really work hand in hand with that. And I think because of that and the hypermobility as well, there are some kind of, I think they describe it as kind of like dystonic movement patterns that can happen with my body. So I just have to be really aware of that and really aware of maintaining my energy levels as much as I can. And if I need a break, I take a break. So it's really, it's making sure that I listen to my body. And I think this is where access riders have come in really handy because I've been able to kind of almost say this is who I am to someone and give that to them and then be like, if there's any questions when we're working together, don't be afraid to come and ask me. It's fine.
Jess also says, and we've slightly touched on this, also when you do a wheelchair pirouette, do you spot? So I'm just going to say, is it because you've learnt to spot? You can't unlearn it, and it works just as well with the wheelchair. Is that what it is, or is it completely different?
I would say that there's definitely an element of because I'd learned to spot previously. And I think with a lot of the ballet technique, again, I think I was very fortunate that I had that training that I was able to think, well, how does this work as a standing dancer? How do I then now take this into my body, my new body? And I think that has been a little bit with spotting, but I've had to kind of build it up because, especially with certain stylistic elements of Latin and ballroom, when I was doing that for competitions, rather than doing a spot as one kind of whole thing with the head, it was kind of like you spot to the corner and you come back because you do a lot of quarter and eighth turns. So then when I came back into ballet, I kind of almost had to recondition myself because there were times where I turned the wheelchair and my head hadn't quite, come round in the same sort of motion of speed and it was a little bit out of sync. So that is something that I definitely had to work on. But I think because it's that thing of the more I became confident in who I was as an artist, the more I relaxed, the less anxious I became. And then I noticed that things kind of started to happen more easily. And I think when because I do a little bit of teaching as well on Zoom, when I work with a dancer, I kind of say, like, don't put too much pressure on yourself because I am someone that does that a lot and it just doesn't help. It really doesn't. It almost hinders everything. And I've noticed that when I allow myself maybe to care just a very little bit less than I would usually, things happen and it's better. So that's yeah, and that's something I've really had to wrestle with as well because I'm someone that really cares about every single detail.
It's really a good thing, though, actually. I mean, I know there has to be a cutoff point, but it is a good thing that you care so much. So Susan says, please can you give us a quick outline of what JPM Productions does and what it's like being not only a dancer and a choreographer, but an administrator?
Yes. So JPM Productions it's sort of, as we kind of briefly touched on a little bit earlier, in the last sort of year and a half, I've noticed that as much as I'm being asked to work as a dancer, I'm also, because it's almost like that choreographic knowledge that Susie instilled in me when I was at White Lodge, Susan Cooper, and then almost choreographing my way as a dancer with a disability. It really opened my eyes up creatively. And then when I was working with different companies, and I do a pas de deux with a standing dancer, how is that going to work? And it allowed me to really push into that creative element. And so in the past sort of couple of years, I suppose you could say that JPM Productions has kind of been in existence, but sort of in like an unofficial capacity. And so when it came to things like Empower in Motion and working with the Learning and Participation program and taking at the Royal Ballet and taking my work there to show it, I felt like I was a really sort of, if you like, they were supporting me, but I was almost it was like I was driving the bus and they were like the co-captain. And so they really let me, kind of push that. And I thought, could I almost make like a company-ish? I tend to say it's more of like a project-based collective, and make something of that. And then, as I said, there were frustrations where I was working with different companies. I'd have a wonderful experience. I think I'd love to do more with them. And then unfortunately, because they're busy or they've got things planned, it meant that I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do now, because as a freelancer, there are times where it's difficult to find work. And as I said, throwing a disability on top of that is just another extra hurdle. So I decided, you know what, I've got these projects coming up this year with Romeo and Juliet, taking it to the Royal Ballet and Opera. I've got Passionately Defiant coming up as well. I've got a dancer, Ella Appleby, who's a really lovely dancer who I actually met working in Wales. And we kind of meet up and we've been working. Could I do something and make JPM Productions a bit more on the map? And so I decided to create it officially by setting up like an Instagram account. All the choreographic work that I do kind of now comes under that. And so JPM Productions is how I describe it. It's a project-based collective that really focuses on pushing access, inclusion, and taking dance, and specifically ballet and other dance styles as well, maybe into local communities who might have to travel really far to be able to witness dance. And so I've been really fortunate that I've applied for an Arts Council funding, and I'm sure if anyone else is applying, you've seen there's kind of been issues with Grantium, so that was kind of, a whole nother thing. But I'm very fortunate that I have been awarded some Arts Council funding, so I'm able to put together a project there, which is really exciting, and I'm really fortunate for it because it's exploring new work and how to bring in accessible features into that. And also I set up a GoFundMe. I'm also showcasing some of the work that I've done in the past year with Ella Appleby online in an online premiere to hopefully, garner some more audience members and push it to a wider audience. And there's a small booking charge to watch that, and that actually goes live this coming Friday. And I'm going to be raising some money for that. And then I also had someone who wishes to remain anonymous, but they gifted me a very, very generous donation, which means that I am also going to be able to put another little project together. And as part of that, there's going to be a one-act version of Giselle, which is going to kind of be really sort of interesting and kind of explore that. And then also through JPM Productions, I've been working with a ballet company, New Works Ballet Theatre in Bristol, who are really, really great. She really wants to push, access and inclusion. In the past sort of year, this past season, she gave me the opportunity to perform the role of Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. And I was like, that is amazing. And then I'm going to be in Hansel and Gretel coming up in January, and she's creating a role. I don't really know what the role is going to be called at the moment, but she said, oh, I'm going to liken it to like the Sugar Plum Fairy and the Sugar Plum Prince of Hansel and Gretel, and you'll have like a big grand pas de deux with a sparkly tutu that you'll partner well. And I was like, yes, this is great. And a solo and a coda. I was like, this is all I want. But I mentioned that to say as well that through JPM Productions, she's also giving me the opportunity to create in their triple bill next summer a one-act version of Sylvia. So that is going to be really exciting as well. And that'll be going to Bristol, Bath, and Newport. But to answer Susie's question about, also being an administrator, it's like, how many hats can you wear? I mean, I've been recently, with the help of my mum, because with my disability, I do get fatigued quite a lot. So I have had to rely on my mum a lot. So I've actually brought her on board and give her an official title of executive artistic producer. And so she's supporting me as well. And so again, I wouldn't be able to do it without her. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this upcoming season brings. And hopefully it's a case of just kind of watch this space and let's see what happens.
You don't sound that busy, When do you come up for air? Incredible.
I don't know.
Yeah. So I've got another question here, and it's from Fiona. Hi Joe, this talk has had detail, honesty, and self-awareness that we don't always get on these chats. Thank you very much for your openness. Like Deborah, I first saw you dance at the Empower in Motion show at Sadler's Wells, then in the Northern Ballet Trio at the Limbury, and most recently in Bristol in the lead role in local small company ballet, which you've just been talking about, Wuthering Heights. In all these, you've impressed me with the intensity of your dramatic performance and magnetic personality on stage in a range of roles. So I wanted to ask, are there any specific characters or roles that attract you to perform if a project could come about?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. So I will always say, I've been very fortunate so far that, creating like a version of a Romeo and Juliet, that's very special to me because it was actually the first ballet that I was in when I came back as a disabled dancer. And Giselle was also a ballet that I was in kind of when I came back. So to be able to now create that and also performing it is hugely special. But I always will have an affinity to the Nutcracker, and it's just there's something about it, the music, the costumes, the choreography, and actually something that I'm doing with JPM Productions as part of that little project that I've been able to get together is I'm going to be working with a couple of dancers to create like a short film that will be released online over Christmas called Delights of the Nutcracker. And I'm actually going to be choreographing a version of the Grand Pas de Deux with Ella Appleby, which I am really excited by. But also I'm bringing in another dancer who's got a ballet and commercial background. And so we're going to have a second piece that at the moment is entitled Two Sides to Every Sugar Plum. And it's going to kind of be like a ballet and a commercial-ish version facing off with each other. But I would absolutely love it. I hope in my future that someone comes to me and says, would you like to be in the Nutcracker? Because I think a dream sort of role would be like almost like a dancing version of the role of Drosselmeyer, because I'm really drawn to roles that have a slightly, how do I say this, like a villainous, morally ambiguous edge, because I think it's so far removed from my personality. And that's what was great about Heathcliff. He isn't always a nice character, but also I think my absolute dream as well is I would love it if at some stage I'd be able to create like a full length ballet and be in it as well. And I feel like the blueprints are being made with Newark's Ballet Theatre. And yes, you know, they are a small company, but her vision is extremely mighty. And so I feel like that's why we work together really well, and JPM Productions works together really well. And also, you know, any major ballet companies, if you want like a disabled choreographer to make something, and I'd have to be in it as well, obviously. I would absolutely love that. So yeah, I'm here if anyone give me a call, give me an email. To be honest, I'm open to anything, as long as someone wants to work with me and wants to make things more inclusive. I will want to work with you, and I think that's the best way I can answer it.
I think that's wonderful. You've got to think big. You've got to just grab the moment. And on that note, I'm going to hand back to Susan because, Fiona is just clapping her hands. Obviously, a very good answer. So that's wonderful. And Susan is back with us. So I think we've covered all the questions. I'm going to hand back to you, Susan.
Thank you. And I think we're all clapping our hands for tonight's talk. It's just been fascinating. You're an inspiration, Joe, not just to those people who need help from a support worker or crutches or a wheelchair, but to all of us. Your energy, your youth, your determination, your optimism, and all your brilliant ideas. This is so exciting to watch. And I really feel like this is just the beginning. I mean, you're on that diving board now and you're springing on it, and pretty soon you're going to take off. I also want to say that I have met your mom several times and she's amazing. I know all ballet parents are incredible. Their generosity with their time, their patience, they're sitting in cars waiting, and you know, crazy schedules and so on. But your mom, your family is incredible, and that's just a terrific gift to all of us. So, you know, we need to thank the families as much as you do. So, Debs, thank you very much. Another great job. Absolutely wonderful. So please go on the website and take a look at our upcoming talks with Melissa Hamilton, Joy Womack, and Tamara Rojo. Everything you need to know is on there. Check out JPM Productions on the internet. And everybody, a big round of applause to Deborah and Joe, and have a great summer, what's left of it. And we'll see you all in September. Thank you so very much, Joe and Deborah and everybody. So good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was a great event. So thank you for having me.